Welcome back to 340 Paddler. Today I want to talk about repairing a sunken boat. So in 2016, I managed to sink a Stellar 18S at Cooper's Landing, hitting a submerged rock at the end of a wing dike. And no matter how much I talk about, the current pushed me into it, etc., ultimately I was in the wrong place and it was my fault that the boat sank. So this is how the boat got through the race. The last 140 miles held together by Gorilla clear repair tape. Layer upon layer of it. I will do a video on how to do this because it was extremely successful, but you can see some of the damage there. And it got through barge wakes and everything else. Then I got home and decided it's about time to clean this up and create a functioning boat once again. This is what I found. What we have here is damage that covers an area of about 28 to 30 inches in length. And there's an initial crack up above on the right-hand side, sort of passing down until we get to that massive gouge. All of this right at or below the waterline. That large section is about 2 inches by 12 inches. Huge area to let water in. The boat pretty much sank by the time I got to the boat launch, and it was a bad experience. I don't recommend it. When you flip the boat over, and this is with it sitting upright, you really see that damage and how big that was. How much is torn up in this Stellar surfski. So let's get started. My first thought was, let's try and get this piece back into place. So I super glued some wooden dowels into place and tried using those to pull this piece into place. In the meantime, I was cutting away very carefully any excess material, any out of place material and fibers to get as flush a fit as possible. I was using a little bit of super glue every couple of inches just to tack it in. However, by the time I get to the end, things had changed. What I did is I got rid of the wooden dowels. Those didn't work. What I did instead is use some coarse thread screws that I ran in through it. Those gripped quite well, and then pulled everything forward, working slowly around the piece. And then I used epoxy to try and re-glue it into line. Now, that isn't all of the repair, but this is enough to kind of put that piece back into place, hopefully get a little bit of strength out of that core. I then flushed it, so sanded it to flush, sanding down the extra epoxy because I was very liberal with the use of the epoxy. And I was using West Systems. I was using Moss, which I've always had good luck with and I've used for some builds in the past. Now from here I don't have a good picture, but obviously things are not perfectly faired at this point, not perfectly smooth. So I used Bondo to go in and fair in the surface. There was surprisingly little Bondo used, so it was a fairly smooth surface by the time I got things kind of re-glued. And I should point out, the re-gluing process took me hours, going around, getting the super glue tacks in place, and then putting the epoxy in place, and trying to find ways to make this all as flush as possible. Now I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit. The Bondo was applied, it was sanded down. A lot of sanding went into this, and you will go through gel coat as soon as you start sanding a surfski. And then what I did is I applied 2 layers of carbon fiber. This is a fairly heavyweight carbon fiber. I couldn't quote you the exact weave, I apologize for that. And I've masked off everything that I don't want involved with the carbon fiber. You're actually seeing the first coat that goes on. And when you apply carbon fiber, unless you have a vacuum set up, you're kind of stuck. You want to get as much of the resin out as possible, but not leave it dry. So what I did is I used saran wrap and just slowly worked over it to smooth it all out as perfectly as possible, to get rid of all the ridges or anything else, to get out all of the excess epoxy, and then tape it down. And this is more or less the result. Now, this is where I made a mistake in this construction, is I applied my carbon fiber and then I applied an extra coat of epoxy just to fill in, finish wetting out, well, not wetting out, but finish filling in the carbon fiber. And then I went ahead and just faired that in. And I probably would have been fine at this point. But I'm a little obsessive and I wanted to do some experimentation, which is where I started doing this. I applied about 1.5 inches of gel coat all the way around the carbon fiber, trying to get rid of any thin spots in the gel coat. Now, the gel coat is there just to protect the fiberglass and the materials underneath. I could have just hit it with some spray paint and called it a day. In fact, that's what was recommended to me by a couple of people. But I wanted to see what would happen. If I were to do this again, what I would do is lay the carbon fiber and then go ahead and add the gel coat before fairing out the carbon fiber, so that the gel coat is at the same level as the carbon fiber, and then I can fair the whole thing in and get a nice, crisp, clean line. So this is what we ended up with. This large panel of carbon fiber, it's roughly, if memory serves, roughly about 40 inches long and about 6 inches wide. And I left it exposed. I kind of like the fact that it's, this big hunk of carbon fiber. If I wanted to, I could gel coat over it or spray paint over it. And more than likely, unless you were looking at it up close, you wouldn't notice much. The key issue here was fairing it in and making sure that everything was polished and faired as smoothly as possible. I don't want to interrupt the water flow. Now, if you're saying to yourself, well, that seems awfully weak, keep in mind the ICF canoes, etc. are using 2 to 3 coats of carbon fiber. The same thing I do here, but they're not using a sandwich material. This stuff can be very strong. This is arguably a stronger section of the boat than anywhere else on the boat. And the carbon fiber, of course, also stuck to that part of the gouge that pushed in, and thus is holding it in place on top of all the epoxy that went into initially putting it back into place. This whole project probably took me about 15 hours, most of which was sanding and just sort of prepping surfaces. If you were to do this, make sure you're prepping everything. Everything is clean, everything is well done. If you don't do that, it's not going to work. And this has proven to be a perfect seal. Now, this boat has been repaired in the past, so it doesn't bother me too much, and someday I will sell this to someone. And, they'll look at this repair and wonder if I've done a proper job. And hopefully I have. So far, so good. And yes, I would be willing to run this boat again in the 340. In fact, I might in 2017. Who knows? So hopefully this helps some of you out. This may not be the right repair method for your problem, but if you want, you can always leave me questions, comments, concerns, quarrels, qualms, quandaries, or curse words right down in the comments. I will be happy to reply to those, answer them to the best of my ability. Until next time, this is 340 Paddler, hoping that you are keeping your paddle in the water.